In my very last conversation with my dad just hours before his death, he spoke about the man who shaped his life the most, his dad, Reverend H. Mansfield Collins. Dubbed the Dollar Money King for the amount of money he raised in the AME Church, my grandfather was a larger-than-life figure to my dad growing up in the 1920s during his pastorate at Quinn Chapel AME in Chicago. Speaking of larger-than-life, my dad had some of the most amazing stories. One was of those days in then gangland Chicago and of an ice cream parlor he and my aunt and uncle were warned to steer clear of, as it was a favorite stop of Al Capone, who would treat all the neighborhood kids to ice cream. One day, my dad, my uncle, and one of their friends just happened to be in the vicinity when Capone drove up, and of course got ice cream cones. Walking home, my grandfather comes driving up the street. Well, my dad and my uncle tossed their ice cream. They looked over and their friend hadn't. "Throw away your ice cream," they told him, to which the friend replied, "He's not my daddy." In 1935, the family moved to Los Angeles with my grandfather's appointment to First AME, then known as 8th and Town. Enrolling at Polytechnic High School, my dad would meet a lifelong friend in classmate Tom Bradley. Years later, when Bradley was a police lieutenant, he'd give him a call if he had a problem, and Bradley would say, "Come on around and pick me up, I'll handle it." Aside from inheriting my grandfather's charisma, my dad could sing, and with a beautiful baritone voice, he joined a choral group organized by noted composer Chester Hairston and would perform around town. Hairston had relationships with the studios, and my dad and others in the group would often be tapped to sing in films like Imitation of Life, Behind Mahalia Jackson, and Porgy at Best, starring Sidney Poitier, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dorothy Dandridge. But perhaps his biggest bit part, and to us kids the funniest, came in 1949 when he, along with famed black character actor Joel Llewellyn, landed a small part in Mighty Joe Young.
Played that little opening scene in Mighty Joe Young. Through Justice Agent, I went out and auditioned for it and got that role. Joe Llewellyn and I, we did it together. We were the two imbeciles that sold Mighty Joe Young.
My dad's first experience in activism came as a member of the famed Tuskegee Airmen. It was in 1943 that he was drafted into the armed forces during World War II. My grandfather was able to pull some strings and secure recommendations from a congressman and an Army general in order to get him cleared to take the test for the Air Force Flight School at Tuskegee, Alabama. Of his days as one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen, my dad likes to fondly recall that he was the first member of his class to fly solo. Yep, solo. But what he rarely admits to is that it was not by his choice. In fact, he thought he was just out for another routine training flight when his instructor said, "Collins, I think you're ready to fly solo." And my dad said, oh no, I'm not ready." To which the instructor replied, "Yes, you are," as he parachuted out of the twin-engine trainer plane, leaving my dad to fly the plane solo. In 1945, in what was dubbed as the Freeman Field Mutiny, members of the Tuskegee Airmen 477th Bombardment Group attempted to integrate an all-white officers' club. The mutiny resulted in 162 separate arrests of black officers. My dad was proud of having been one of those involved, demanding equal privileges for black officers and being characterized as an agitator. In 1948, 3 years later, President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981, racially integrating the United States Air Force. It was the beginning of a focus on civil rights that would shape his lifelong service.
My dad met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the late 50s through a pastor friend, Reverend Larry Odom, who had been a classmate of Dr. King's at Morehouse College. They shared stories and hit it off so well that the next time Dr. King came to Los Angeles, he asked, "Where's Mansfield?" and then directed someone to go and get my dad. And just like that, they became fast friends. After that, if Dr. King was in Los Angeles, you can surely bet my dad was with him. In 1961, with the title of Executive Director of the Western Christian Leadership Conference, my dad officially became responsible for planning Dr. King's itinerary whenever he came to Los Angeles. This was during a time of great change in Los Angeles, and Dr. King was in great demand, and it meant going through my dad. Through his good friend Ed Clayton, the co-founder of Jet magazine, came another invaluable friendship.
And his wife was named Zenona Clayton, who later I was able to send them down to Atlanta, Georgia, to be the publicity director for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that's why Mrs. Clayton today is in Atlanta, Georgia, and she never lets me forget it, and I never let her forget it.
Zernona would recall that Dr. King and Dad were like brothers. They were Martin and Mansfield in private, Dr. King and Reverend Collins in public. They would bust out laughing upon seeing each other, as if to say, "Boy, am I glad to see you," even if only a week had passed since they last saw one another. After events, they would eat together and go over plans for the next day. It was an exciting time. But as our phones were tapped, our house was watched, Dr. King's movements closely monitored, and people were making death threats, my dad was all too aware of the danger. But Dad was not afraid and was always a fearless man, like his father, H. Mansfield Collins. I drove Dr. King one day while I was in high school, and I admit I was thinking about my safety. My dad never feared for his own safety when he was with Martin.
One of the things that was always present with Martin Luther King, he knew he would be assassinated. He just knew that. And I remember we were at Temple Beth Israel out on Hollywood Boulevard. And Wyatt Walker said, "Mansfield, you walk in the front of him." And I walk in the back. I said, "Why should I walk in the front?" He said, "So you can get the first bullet." So that was always a part of what it was.
Dr. King spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, not just for protest and advocacy, but raising money for the civil rights movement through parties at the homes of top Hollywood celebrities, as well as gala Hollywood premieres and rallies like the massive LA Freedom Rally, the largest civil rights rally held on the West Coast. A similar rally was held at the Coliseum, and it taught him a very powerful lesson.
I learned from that. After the burning of the bus at Anniston, and I learned from that something. When I put Martin in the Coliseum, that was, 6 months later maybe, but there wasn't any immediate urgency. We didn't have the burning of the bus at Anniston, we didn't have the march and anything, and about 25,000 people came out to the Coliseum, and I learned a lesson. The only way you're going to pack a place like the Coliseum is when something is hot, when something has happened. And I learned that lesson. I said I'd never do that again.
Dr. King was Martin to my dad. They were truly soulmates. On September 23, the day my dad passed away, Martin was probably saying, "Mansfield, you sure took long enough down there. Now get up here with the rest of us and your family."
Being a preacher's kid, church was all my grandfather knew. From his early days in Quinn Chapel's Regal Sanctuary in Chicago to assisting his father in 8th in Town, now First AME. And then for 2 decades, serving as my great-grandfather's assistant pastor at Neighborhood Community Church. After 20 years serving alongside my great-grandfather, he decided it was time to spread his wings with the establishment of All Saints Community Church in 1962.
I started the church because I had been the assistant pastor of Neighborhood Community Church for about 20 years. I had the first services of All Saints Community Church in the mortuary chapel of Carter and Johnson on Avalon Boulevard.
Of course, among his first speakers was his dear friend, Martin King.
When I organized my church over in the mortuary at Carter and Johnson, one of my first guest preachers was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Pictured here is his first choir with good buddy Zernona Clayton as director. Dr. King would go on to speak for him on any number of occasions, including in this very sanctuary just months before he was tragically assassinated in 1968. 8 years after launching the church and purchasing the very facility we are gathered in today, my grandfather made the decision to return to the AME Church.
My father's history was in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I had a lot of friends in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And they all said, Collins, you ought to come into the church. And then finally, my good friend, Bishop H. Hartford Brookins, finally convinced me it was about the best thing I was going to do.
After serving churches in the cities of St. Louis, Tacoma, Oakland, and Hannibal, Missouri, my grandfather retired from the AME Church. At about the same time, my aunt was establishing LA Focus, so my grandfather went to work with her, calling on many of the same pastors he called on years earlier, E.V. Hill, Bishop H. Brookins, and Thomas Kilgore among them.
I helped her in the building of LA Focus as well as I could with the total ministry that I knew in Los Angeles, California.
Although the church he founded would ultimately become Bright Temple AME, he considered it his church up until the day he passed.
To the world, he was Reverend G. Mansfield Collins, but to us, he was dad, uncle, and grandfather. His first son and namesake is Mansfield. Then he had his daughter Elise, and Timothy arrived soon after. He later had his daughter Cassandra and son Timothy, affectionately known as Little Tim. His nephews, Joey and Danny, were also highly regarded as his brother's precious boys. In 1982, he welcomed his first grandchild, Brandon, and then Lindsay and Christopher. My brother and I got to know him as a caretaker and family man. He lived with us for almost 10 years, and as his grandchildren, we relished in his stories. We shared them far and wide because we knew his legacy and personhood were meant to reverberate among each community he called home. He also had his beloved daughter-in-law, Melba, and countless other members of our family who would show up for him time and time again to assist him and love on him. As a second grader, I remember asking my grandfather if I could take his signed picture of Dr. King to school with me for show and tell. He obliged. My grandfather could not tell me no. So I took it to school. I returned home to my grandfather, who was asking for the picture. I didn't have it. I left it at school. And that photo, needless to say, never found its way back home. But my grandfather's love for his family outweighed his friends and incredible moments of the past. As he never made us feel inadequate for mistakes, he simply focused on moving on, stronger and better in the present. We are strong, courageous, civic-minded, agitators, intelligent, kind, loving, and forgiving because of the legacy he passed down. Grandfather, we had you longer than anyone could have imagined, and we are beholden to the fact that you now are our fearless protector and most brilliant angel in heaven. On his 101st birthday, he shared with us the importance of family.
No man could be any happier than to have the loving family around him right now.
started out with Jesus at a very early age. Yes, I've known him nearly all of my life. I admit there have been times when I faltered along the way, but I'll keep trying. Somehow I've gotta make it in. I've got a charge on my life, and I've got a job to do, and I can't stop until it's through. I'm determined. I've got a made up mind. I can't stand around wasting my time. I'm gonna keep on working for Jesus every day of my life, 'cause I've got heaven on my mind. I don't have time to waste criticizing someone else. There are some things I'd rather leave behind, and another thing, I don't have time to be bothered with he said, that she said, that they said, because it's all I can do to keep my own self in line. See, I must work while this day, because the night is surely coming. I'm going all the way. Oh, I'm determined. Yes, I am. I've got a made up mind. I've got a made up mind. I can't stand around. Can't stand around wasting my time. I'm gonna keep on working for Jesus every day of my life, 'cause I've got heaven on my mind. Oh, I can't understand how some people can move so slow. Maybe they don't know just what time it is. But you see, he's coming back, and I know that it won't be long. I've got to be ready for my story crown. I want to hear him say, well done. I've got a made up mind. Got a made up mind. I can't stand around wasting my time. I'm gonna keep on working for Jesus every day of my life. Oh yes I am, 'cause I've got heaven on my mind. Hey, you can't talk about me. Say what you wanna say. You can't stand around wasting your time. But you know what? While you talking, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna keep on walking. I'll keep right on walking, because I've got a heaven on my mind. Hey! Oh yes I am. I've got a made up mind. I can't afford to stand around here wasting my time. I'm gonna keep right on working for Jesus every day of my life. I've got heaven. I've got heaven on my mind. Hey. I've got heaven